All right, ladies and gentlemen, please let me know that you can hear me. As soon as you do, I will get started because I've got a lot of material to talk about. I am audible, correct? Audio and video is as it should be. Not entirely sure why I'm checking because I don't know what I can do if it's not. All right, I have one remark saying weird sound. You may well be hearing a fan, which I can't really do anything about because the computer is doing its thing in the increased temperature. So yeah, there might be a fan fairly close to the microphone itself, which will come over, through the signal. All right, so everybody can hear me, and I am visible. Sorry, just checking the remarks here. Almost there. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, so I have a few yeses. In the absence of anyone croaking about how awful it is, I will go ahead and start. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. This evening, in our current circumstances, I thought it might be appropriate to consider the plague years. In this particular case, the first big wave of the plague that hit Europe in the middle of the 1300s. And I will do that through the words and observations of Boccaccio, who was present there at the time, and who gives us an account of what things were like in Italy at the time in his Decameron, his 10 days of storytelling with 10 stories for each day. In the course of that, I will give a bit of consideration to Western stories in general, just in passing as relates to our topic. And then I will bring it round to the central question of life. Yes, after a fashion. So that should be worth something for those who give a damn about such things. Before we get started, please do follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as the sister channel, A Safer Space. You can do that here on YouTube. You can do it on BitChute. You can find me on Twitter, and I encourage everyone who can tolerate the Twitter environment to do so. I put up all kinds of material on there regularly. There's also Gab, there's Minds. For those who wish to support the channel, there is Subscribestar and GoFundMe. Oh, and for those who wish to send things that are both legal and moral, there is also a post office box address. It is P.O. Box 16006, Atlanta, Georgia 30316. All right, I think that covers all of the opening material. I should say to everyone, I hope that you are well and that you are sheltering in place as directed so that the curve can be flattened, so the peak can be reduced and extended so as not to overwhelm our medical facilities. I'm not entirely sure what I think of all of this coronavirus business. I have probably much more than my fair share of skepticism that I am coping with. That being said, please do follow the instructions of authorities, even if you wanted to go out and do things, contrary to the instructions. There's not a whole lot going on out there. Better safe than sorry is the approach, people have proven over quite some time is the best. And I'm not generally going to be speaking about coronavirus tonight. I hope to be speaking with Tim tomorrow, at which point I really want to dig into this because I have any number of questions. And so hopefully I will be speaking with Tim tomorrow. It will not be a live stream. I will have to capture it with Skype, but it will be up within, 12 to 24 hours from when we talk. So expect something on Thursday, maybe, if I'm lucky, very late U.S. time on Wednesday night. So we come to the topic, which is Plague Reflections, which is Boccaccio, Western stories, and the central question of life. After I get through this material, which will involve a fair amount of reading, but it's very, very interesting reading. I hope you will stick around for it. Following it, though, we will do some Ask Me Anything, depending on how much time we have. So we have stories. We have any number of stories in the West, in our culture. A rich heritage of them, an enormous number of them that have been around for quite some time. But what's so strange is that there are many stories that we told for centuries, if not millennia. You know, in the case of the Alexander romances, which were fictionalized, you know, fabulous accounts of the exploits of Alexander, those things have been being told for quite a bit more than 1,000 years. But we don't tell them so much among ourselves today. Though vestiges remain, you know, there are people who analyze the archetypal forms inherent in some expression in literature and find that these same themes have been in place. You know, things get carried over in that way. But we used to tell these stories for long periods of time, and they were well known in our culture. As a matter of fact, I think there's a part in Chaucer where somebody's telling a story and mentions this bit out of one of the Alexander romances, and they're in the 1300s, you know, after these stories had been told even at that point for 1,000 years. The person who mentions part of the story apologizes and said, you know, I know it's so well known. You know, there's another series of stories that has been around since the 1200s, late 1200s, maybe early 1300s, and that is the Gesta Romanorum. And this is a collection of tales. It's supposedly tales of the Romans, but they're, of course, medieval tales. And they are made fabulous in many respects, at least with some of the tales, in the same way that you see with the romances of Alexander. And these stories have been around for forever. I mean, basically, the Gesta Romanorum was what you could call a bestseller in Europe, but it wasn't for one of these periods that's like a gnat's life that we think of. It was for centuries. It was commonly read by everyone to each other as a pastime, as a diversion. You know, when they were tired. You know, at this point, you have to understand that people did not read themselves very often at all, and when they did, they read aloud even so. You know, in monasteries, you had monks who were in the course of eating, and they would have sacred texts, meditational texts read to them as they ate, so that they could feed their soul in the same way that they fed their bodies through this exercise. And outside of monastic practice, you know, of course, you had less literacy. Up through the Middle Ages, it wasn't quite as bad as everyone imagined, but fewer people could read, certainly fewer in Latin, you know, though some could handle the vernacular, though I don't think things began to be written in the vernacular until, I think Dante with the Divine Comedy was a big, you know, first mover in that respect. Anyway, people read aloud, and they would read to each other. And that happened in a sacred context in a church or a monastery, as well as in, you know, the rooms to which people withdrew to drink and converse. You know, things that you see like discussions you see represented in books like Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courtier. So stories like the Gesta Romanorum were read among families, you know, for those who did such things. And at any rate, having been around for centuries and with these stories, the traditions of them having worked their way into everybody's awareness, they gave rise to similar compositions. And one of those is the Decameron of Boccaccio, which was done right in the middle of the 1300s, maybe 1350s. So whatever the exact date is, somebody could check. I'm not sure I have that right, but it was certainly within close proximity, time-wise, to the horrible plague years. And in places like Florence, of course, Boccaccio came from Florence. It is said, again, somebody can check my figures, but I believe in major cities with population concentrations that they had deaths from the plague as much as 60 or 70% of the population. So Boccaccio writes this book called the Decameron, and it's a collection of stories. It's a frame that holds other stories, much in the way you see with Chaucer, who is said, I think, to have borrowed that idea from Boccaccio. And of course, you know, frame stories in those arrangements are much older. It's not as though Boccaccio innovated, strictly speaking, but the stories are just excellent. So all of this starts basically, the idea is that he has these three men and 7 women. Those figures are doubtless not accidental, but have their allegorical implications. 3 men and 7 women retired during the plague years from the horrors of Florence, and they divert themselves by telling stories for 10 days, each day 10 stories. So if you actually get your hands on the collection, the stories are short. You can read one before you go to bed. They're bite-sized. They're designed to be read in a group setting as a pastime and a diversion for people. And of course, the picture of retreating from the plague years to indulge in consideration of these wild stories, it reflects perhaps how many of us look at life and entertainment and diversions from the whips and scorns of time, the pangs of despise, love, the oppressor's wrong, and all these other things that we've heard about that are awful. The slings and arrows. You have a chance to retreat, but you have to, and you retreat with these stories, that are a bit wild. They have to be entertaining. They have to have something to draw you. So what I'm going to talk about here is not boring. And we're only going to touch upon the stories themselves a bit. We'll focus more on how Boccaccio opens this whole story up with his eyewitness account of what he experienced in Florence during the plague years, the worst hit that the worst blow struck by the Black Plague in Europe ever. The first time it really hit and just smashed all of Europe to pieces after having laid waste too much of the world. And so we have his eyewitness account of what happened there. But we have these stories, in this case stories told in times of plague, and this is when everyone is shut in. And as I said, they require entertainment and diversion, but they also require, in addition to that entertainment aspect, worthwhile objects of consideration, things that aren't just designed to pass the time. They need real sustenance rather than fairy food. That's a favorite metaphor of mine. You get gobbled up beneath the hill, and you can see the glowing golden candlelight as the fairies have their feast, and there's just food in every direction, and you pass all your time, and then you wake up in the morning finding out that you're 60 years older, your entire life is gone, and you're belching up dust because there was nothing real about any of it. That's what I mean when I say that we need worthwhile objects of consideration, something more than just a pastime. Even so, you have to put the pill into the dog food. It has to remain entertaining, and I think that's what we see with Boccaccio's stories. It's like what we see with Shakespeare, where there's food for thought for them that are capable of thinking, and there are also pratfalls and bloody spectacles for the groundlings. So as I said, I'm not going to really go into the stories. I want you yourselves to get out there and look up the Alexander romance, or romances, because there are versions of these stories of Alexander that were written down and circulated again for centuries in Armenia, in Persia, in Greece, in Russia, in France, in Germany, in England, all over the world. Also take a look at the Gesta Romanorum, which has all kinds of wild and crazy stories in it. And again, they're bite-sized so that you can keep them by your bed to serve as a diversion even during plague years. And we have the business of Boccaccio's collection itself. Before I jump in and read you his description of those plague years, and again, after all this, we'll do some Ask Me Anything for those who are just jumping into the stream. But before I get to that, I want to just give you a few examples of summaries of these stories that you will find in the Decameron. And for people who are rolling along in the comments section, hopefully everybody knows by now that I cannot follow the comments while I'm talking until we get to the Ask Me Anything phase, at which point I will really only see the comments that you've placed that, have the highlight for me, the @Semiagog at the beginning, so they stand out. But while I'm going through all of this, I'm not seeing the comments, so don't take it personally if I don't respond. So here are some of the stories that we have indicated as being from Boccaccio. Now it looks like my picture here is frozen. Hopefully this will not continue. Let me see if I can change the latency. Sorry, peoples. Can I change the latency in midstream? No. Okay, I'm waiting. Looks like the stream went down. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Then I will continue. First off, hopefully that wasn't too big a mess. We'll cover samples, quick summaries of some of the stories that are available in Boccaccio. So you shouldn't be frightened of them. You can get a hold of the book, lay it by your bed, and enjoy these diverting vignettes, these diverting tableaus, as it suits you and as you have the time. Here's one. Andreuccio of Perugia, coming to Naples to buy horses, meets with 3 perilous adventures in one night, from all which he escapes and returns with a ruby of value. Or another perhaps, a young scholar named Felix teaches one Puccio how he may be saved by performing a penance which he shows him. This he puts into execution, and in the meantime Felix amuses himself with his wife. Tofano shuts his wife one night out of doors, and she, not being able to persuade him to let her in, pretends to throw herself into a well, and drops a big stone in. He runs thither in a fright. She slips into the house, and, locking him out, abuses him well. One thing you will notice about these stories is that there are aspects of them that appeal to both men and women. And it seems that Boccaccio knew that, as today in the past, the primary reading audience was females, often being kept in and out of the sun so they could keep their pallid complexions and remain viable choices as wives with their dowries and all the rest. Or perhaps one read while others were spinning and weaving. I do not know, but you will see in these stories that there's plenty of material there to interest women as well as men. So here's a last one from Boccaccio. A certain scholar is in love with a widow lady named Helena, who, being enamored of another person, makes the former wait a whole night for her during the midst of winter in the snow. In return, he afterwards contrives that she shall stand naked on the top of a tower in the middle of July, exposed to the sun and all manner of insects. So there are adventure stories, there are revenge stories, there are many that involve people getting on with each other's wives. These are medieval Italians. So there's a lot that is, the pill and the dog food, and there's plenty of the dog food as well. But now let's turn to Boccaccio's description here. And I hope this will set the stage for some more philosophical considerations at the end of this reading, which will bring us to the whole business of questions about life itself, and then we'll jump to the Ask Me Anything. So here, this is taken from the first pages of Boccaccio's Decameron. Okay, my stream is not broken down. Okay, good. Looks like it's still rolling. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. In the year then of our Lord, 1348, there happened at Florence, the finest city in all Italy, a most terrible plague, which, whether owing to the influence of the planets, or that it was sent from God as a just punishment for our sins, had broken out some years before in the Levant, and after passing from place to place, and making incredible havoc all the way, had now reached the West. There, in spite of all the means that art and human foresight could suggest, such as keeping the city clear from filth, the exclusion of all suspected persons, and the publication of copious instructions for the preservation of health, and notwithstanding manifold humble supplications offered to God in processions and otherwise, it began to show itself in the spring of the aforesaid year, in a sad and wonderful manner. Unlike what had been seen in the East, where bleeding from the nose is the fatal prognostic, here there appeared certain tumors in the groin or under the armpits, some as big as a small apple, others as an egg, and afterwards purple spots in most parts of the body, in some cases large and but few in number, in others smaller and more numerous. Both sorts, the usual messengers of death. To the cure of this malady, neither medical knowledge nor the power of drugs was of any effect, whether because the disease was in its own nature mortal, or that the physicians, the number of whom, taking quacks and women pretenders into account, was grown very great, or that the physicians could form no just idea of the cause, nor consequently devise a true method of cure. Whichever was the reason, few escaped, but nearly all died the 3rd day from the first appearance of the symptoms, some sooner, some later, without any fever or accessory symptoms. What gave the more virulence to this plague was that, by being communicated from the sick to the hale, it spread daily, like fire when it comes in contact with large masses of combustibles. Nor was it caught only by conversing with or coming near the sick, but even by touching their clothes, or anything that they had before touched. It was wonderful, what I am going to mention, and had I not seen it with my own eyes, and were there not many witnesses to attest it besides myself, I should never venture to relate it, however worthy it were of belief. Such, I say, was the quality of the pestilential matter, as to pass not only from man to man, but what is more strange, it has been often known that anything belonging to the infected, if touched by any other creature, would certainly infect, and even kill that creature in a short space of time. One instance of this kind I took particular notice of. The rags of a poor man just dead had been thrown into the street. 2 hogs came up, and after rooting amongst the rags, and shaking them about in their mouths, in less than an hour, they both turned round and died on the spot. These facts, and others of the like sort, occasioned various fears and devices amongst those who survived, all tending to the same uncharitable and cruel end, which was to avoid the sick, and everything that had been near them, expecting by that means to save themselves, and some holding it best to live temperately, and to avoid excesses of all kinds, made parties, and shut themselves up from the rest of the world, eating and drinking moderately of the best, and diverting themselves with music, and such other entertainments as they might have within doors, never listening to anything from without to make them uneasy. Others maintained free living to a better preservative, and would balk no passion or appetite they wished to gratify, drinking and revelling incessantly from tavern to tavern, or in private houses, which were frequently found deserted by the owners, and therefore common to every one, yet strenuously avoiding, with all this brutal indulgence, to come near the infected. And such at that time was the public distress, that the laws, human and divine, were no more regarded, for the officers, to put them in force, being either dead, sick, or in want of persons to assist them, every one did just as he pleased. A third sort of people chose a method between these two, not confining themselves to rules of diet like the former, and yet avoiding the intemperance of the latter, but eating and drinking what their appetites required. They walked everywhere with odors and nosegays to smell to, as holding it best to corroborate the brain, for the whole atmosphere seemed to them tainted with the stench of dead bodies, arising partly from the distemper itself, and partly from the fermenting of the medicines within them, meaning whatever crazy shit they took thinking it would cure them was being sweated out through their bodies, and like many poisons and toxins probably stank to high heaven. Anyway, others with less humanity, but perchance, as they supposed, with more security from danger, decided that the only remedy for the pestilence was to avoid it. Persuaded therefore of this, and taking care for themselves only, men and women in great numbers left the city, their houses, relations, and effects, and fled into the country, as if the wrath of God had been restrained to visit those only within the walls of the city, or else concluding that none ought to stay in a place thus doomed to destruction. Thus divided as they were in their views, neither did all die, nor all escape, but falling sick indifferently, as well those of one as of another opinion, they who first set the example by forsaking others, now languished themselves without pity. I pass over the little regard that citizens and relations showed to each other, for their terror was such that a brother even fled from his brother, a wife from her husband, and what is more common, a parent from his own child. And what is more uncommon, a parent from his own child. Hence numbers that fell sick could have no help but what the charity of friends, who were very few, or the avarice of servants supplied, and even these were scarce, at extravagant wages, and so little used to the business that they were fit only to reach what was called for, and observe when their employer died, and this desire of getting money often cost them their lives. Makes one rather wonder what would happen with all of our imported caregivers were the hammer really to come down in terms of pestilence, which of course is not yet the case at present. From this desertion of friends, I continue, ladies and gentlemen, from this desertion of friends and scarcity of servants, an unheard of custom prevailed. No lady, however young or handsome, would scruple to be attended by a manservant. Whether young or old, it mattered not, and to expose herself naked to him, the necessity of the distemper requiring it, as though it was a woman, which might make those who recovered less modest for the time to come. And many lost their lives who might have escaped had they been looked after at all, so that between the scarcity of servants and the violence of the distemper, such numbers were continually dying, as made it terrible to hear as well as to behold. Whence from mere necessity many customs were introduced different from what had before been known in the city. It had been usual, as it is now, for the women who were friends and neighbors to the deceased to meet together at his house and to lament with his relations. At the same time, the men would gather together at the door with a number of clergy according to the person's circumstances, and the corpse was carried by people of his own rank with the solemnity of tapers and singing to that church where the deceased had desired to be buried. This custom was now laid aside, and so far from having a crowd of women to lament over them, great numbers passed out of the world without a witness. Few were they who had tears of their friends at their departure. Those friends were laughing and making themselves merry the while, for even the women had learned to postpone every other concern to that of their own lives. Nor was a corpse attended by more than 10 or a dozen, nor those citizens of credit, but fellows hired for the purpose, who would put themselves under the bier and carry it with all possible haste to the nearest church, and the corpse was interred without any great ceremony, where they could find room. With regard to the lower sort, many of middling rank, the scene was still more affecting, for they, staying at home either through poverty or hopes of succor in distress, fell sick daily by thousands, and having nobody to attend them, generally died. Some breathed their last in the streets, and others shut up in their houses, where the stench that came from them made the first discovery of their deaths to the neighborhood. And indeed, every place was filled with the dead. Hence it became a general practice, as well out of regard to the living as pity for the dead, for the neighbors, assisted by what porters they could meet with, to clear all the houses and lay the bodies at the doors. And every morning great numbers might be seen brought out in this manner, to be carried away on biers or tables, 2 or 3 at a time. And sometimes it has happened that a wife and her husband, 2 or 3 brothers, and a father and son have been laid together. It has been observed also, whilst 2 or 3 priests have walked before a corpse with their crucifix, that 2 or 3 sets of porters have fallen in with them, and where they knew but of one dead body, they have buried 6, 8, or more. Nor was there any to follow, and shed a few tears over them. For things were come to that pass, that men's lives were no more regarded than that the lives of so many beasts. Thus it plainly appeared that what the wisest in the ordinary course of things, and by a common train of calamities, could never be taught, namely, to bear them patiently, this, by the excess of calamity, was now grown a familiar lesson to the most simple and unthinking. The consecrated ground no longer containing the numbers which were continually brought thither, especially as they were desirous of laying every one in the parts allotted to their families, they were forced to dig trenches, and put them in by hundreds, piling them up in rows, as goods are stored in a ship, and throwing in a little earth, till they were filled to the top. Not to dwell upon every particular of our misery, I shall observe that it fared no better with the adjacent country, for to omit the different boroughs about us, which presented the same view in miniature with the city, you might see the poor distressed laborers, with their families, without either the aid of physicians or the help of servants, languishing on the highways, in the fields, and in their own houses, and dying rather like cattle than human creatures. The consequence was that, growing dissolute in their manners, like the citizens, and careless of everything, as supposing every day to be their last, lost their thoughts. Their thoughts were not so much employed how to improve as how to use their substance for their present support. The oxen, asses, sheep, goats, swine, and the dogs themselves, ever faithful to their masters, being driven from their own homes, were left to roam at will about the fields, and among the standing corn, which no one cared to gather, or even to reap. And many times, after they had filled themselves in the day, the animals would return of their own accord like rational creatures at night. What more can I say if I return to the city? If I return to this... What more can I say if I return to the city? Unless that such was the cruelty of heaven, and perhaps of men, that between March and July following, according to authentic reckonings, upwards of 100,000 souls perished in the city only, whereas before that calamity it was not supposed to have contained so many inhabitants. What magnificent dwellings, what noble palaces were then depopulated to the last inhabitant? What families became extinct? What riches and vast possessions were left, and no known heir to inherit them? What numbers of both sexes in the prime and vigor of youth, whom in the morning neither Galen, Hippocrates, nor Asclepius himself would have denied to be in perfect health, breakfasted in the morning with their living friends, and supped at night with their departed friends in the other world. So, I would not, I think, call that a cheerful bit of material to consider. And I do not in any way suggest that it really has much in common with what we're dealing with now, except that it is best at times like these, one would think, when there are at least echoes of what we experienced in the past, we should look to our own heritage and the way we dealt with those circumstances. And this is where we come to this idea of a central question of life. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, you should pull up on your screens, go to Google. I'm not going to post the image here. You guys should learn to type into search windows and begin to search things for yourselves. Go ahead and look up Lorenzo Alberti. Lorenzo. I think it's Lorenzo Alberti. Well, just type Alberti. If I have the first name wrong, just put Alberti and then put in quotes quid tum. Quid space TUM. So quote QUID space TUM, end quotes, along with Alberti. And that will pull up the medal of a famous Renaissance man, Alberti himself, who was quite something of an architect, but who also wrote and thought about painting in perspective and proportion and other things. Apparently he wasn't much of a painter. Not even sure if he made it to being a sculptor, but he was mentioned by Vasari in Lives of the Artists, and he was very well regarded as sort of an archetypal Renaissance man. And he had this medal cast for himself. And the side of it in question that I want to consider now shows a winged eye, an eye with wings over it, and what is referred to as a fulgur, Latin, fulgur, the Latin word for lightning. And so the eye, which has lightning flashes coming from it and is winged, and is therefore thought to be the eye of Jove watching, is sort of gazing at you from the coin itself. And it reads, quid tum. So if you imagine something, for example, like the Table of the Seven Deadly Sins by Bosch, which has Christ in the center, watching. If you imagine the watching eye of God, and, if you're Richard Dawkins, then you can imagine it's something like a Freudian superego, right? If you're a pagan, you can assume that it's, Wotan or Zeus himself who observes you. If you're a Christian, obviously, all the pieces are in place for the omnipotent, all-seeing, all-knowing God to be aware of what has happened. However you want to take it, think of it as an eye of judgment. your eye as you judge yourself, the eye of God as it judges you, a combination of these things, doesn't matter. There's this eye watching you. Now, when Alberti made this medal, it was a good 100 years after the period we're talking about. But certainly such things would have been well remembered, because the plague appeared again and again, though not quite as bad, over and over again for centuries. Quid tum is the Latin motto that you see beneath the watching eye of God. Quid tum. It can mean all sorts of things. Some people argue it just means, so what? One of the ways of interpreting what's written on that medal of Alberti's is based on knowledge of the fact that Alberti had had some problems with his birth. He was illegitimate, and so, grew up outside proper society as a bastard or whatever he was, but he overcame that and came to be a well-known figure in Florence and remembered through the ages. And so people have argued that his quid tum on that emblem basically means, so what? I overcame, right? Who cares about an eye of judgment? Or perhaps God himself has witnessed my overcoming. I tend to think that that might be a dimension of it, but it's just a bit too... I think it's people of one age looking back at those of another age and projecting all sorts of assumptions about what they would do and how they would look at things, Another way it's been interpreted is by Edgar Wind, and that is in a great book here called Pagan Mysteries of the Renaissance, which I recommend to everyone who might be interested in looking deeper. I'll give you just a taste of this. So, let us see here. The all-seeing eye, which Cusanus introduced as an experimental parable in De Visione Dei, had also its terrifying aspects, and perhaps no Renaissance hieroglyph conveys a sense of terribilità more clearly than the famous winged eye, the emblem of Leon Battista Alberti. Yeah, Leon Battista Alberti. I get these names all screwed up. It's been ages since I looked into the Florentines and Florentine Neoplatonism and the Italian Renaissance, so forgive me, but at least I got Alberti right. Yes, the emblem of Leone Battista Alberti, which appears on his medal with the motto Quid tum. What does the puzzling figure mean, and what is meant by its Ciceronian motto? He talks about the idea of the bird of prey watching and the Egyptian background with the hieroglyphica of Harapalo and how it influenced emblem creation. So he talks about the seeing eye of a bird of prey and speed and the piercing vision of a bird, and then comes to this. In this context, the Ciceronian formula quid tum, which can mean so what, but it can mean other things as we'll get to, assumes a fearful eschatological meaning. Cicero used the phrase repeatedly as an expression of oratorical suspense, an exclamation. In that usage, when Cicero said quid tum, it meant, what then? So we have the feeling of it meaning, so what? But we have the meaning of it being, what then? Which filled a pause and aroused the listener's expectation. But if the quid tum refers to the approach of the god, then the classical phrase of expectation expands into a threatening sense of dies irae, the day of judgment, which, as St. Paul said in, let's skip that. Essential to the threatening effect of Alberti's hieroglyph is the incompatibility of the two components. An eye can focus clearly only from a steady point, its vision being blurred by rapid motion. But here the speed of the wings and the sharpness of vision are united in one supernatural act. Manens moveor, omnipresence. It's long been thought that Alberti deliberately refrained from explaining this emblem anywhere in his writings, but a passage was recently found in a minor dialogue, Annuli, where he seems to break his silence. He discusses an image that he defines as the oculus alis aquilae in Cygnus. Yet the passage hides almost as much as it discloses. In describing the emblem, Alberti omits the motto, while giving a full explanation of the eye, and hardly accounts for the wings at all. He opens with, these mysteries need then to be explained, but then in the next sentence he says, I shall speak only of one or two of these things so that you can recognize the rest by yourself. And the same tantalizing manner of speech is resumed at the end. I prefer to be very short, brevissimus, for to give an exhaustive account of such a compact matter would be prolix, particularly as you yourself, in the measure of your wisdom, will be able, if you apply your mind to it, to perceive the meaning without the last remnant of those mystical veils that the author declined to remove. So he's got quid tum, and we know that it could mean, so what? We know that it could mean, what then? It could even mean, what next? So think about this, the idea of everything that you do, who you are, what you aspire to, your actions, taking place before an eye of judgment. And think of the attitude of, so what? I'm not interested. It describes sort of the status of the blind, the idea that whether it's God above or some figure in a pantheon or before some sort of tribunal of their own soul, or judged by their own reason, right? They just don't seem to care one way or another about the idea of judging themselves and their own actions and what they wish to do, what they wish to become. They say, so what? And that is doubtless one of the meanings of Alberti's emblem. But then there's the idea of what then? It's right there in the ambiguity of the phrase, both aspects are inherent in it. Well, if you are being watched and judged, what then? But then, if you take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them, well then afterwards you can say again, so what? Followed again by what then? And it can also mean, what next? So you see in this one emblem of judgment and these attitudes toward it that are reflected in the phrase itself and its ambiguity, this multiplicity of ways that people can meet their fortune and circumstances, recognizing all the while that they will be judged. Whether, again, that is, in some sort of courtroom within their own soul, or if it's just reason, rational judgment, from a utilitarian perspective, whatever, or if it's, by God above. We have this idea in the West that we must watch what we do. It's been brought down to date in a horrible manner in this expression, do better. This slobbering expression, do better. There's always an opportunity to do better, so we should look at what we're doing and do better. No, imagine that you are judged, whether judged by God or yourself or perhaps both. And meet your circumstances. Will you meet it like someone who basically just ruminates and uses the bathroom and seeks to have sex and eat? These aspects that in the Middle Ages we thought of as the vegetative aspects of the soul and the animal aspects of the soul rather than the rational or even the spiritual aspects of our existence. And for those who want to get into it, I probably mixed up soul and spirit in the back there, but we don't have to get into these models at present. The main point stands. Will we say, so what? With Gen X irony and disinterest? Or do we say, shit, what then? So that we can then overcome and perhaps say, so what? What's next? And we see this laid out with the story of Boccaccio, where these 3 men and 7 women step away from all the circumstances that are going on around them out in the world, all the horrors. And you can be sure that as Boccaccio described them in his text, he was going out of his way, not really to reveal the horrors that he had seen, because it would be unfit for gentle company, and his book was intended, at least in part, for women. But even so, you can clearly see what a nightmare it was, and how these people withdrew, and they read these old stories that had been passed around for quite some time. It's rather like looking at all the plays of Shakespeare. Again, you have the pill, and you have the dog food, you have the medicine and the sugar coating on the outside, you have the spectacles and the pratfalls and the rest that I referred to earlier, and you have the more serious matter that one can chew and consider And it is at times when you are sheltering in place, when you have withdrawn from the world. It's at times like these that it's perhaps worthwhile to consider what others have done, to consider the possibility of an all-seeing eye watching you, wherever one might wish to position that eye of the observer. Perhaps you can consider that and your own circumstances, take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Now, again, I don't mean to say that what's going on with the coronavirus now has much in common at all, though there are parallels that can be seen in what we heard with Boccaccio describing things. And if other things happen at the same time as this wink wink black swan event, that it could get stranger still in a hurry. But again, I'm not going to be talking about the coronavirus. I just want to point out that I don't see the plague of the 1340s, wherever, 1348, somewhere in there. I don't see that plague as having much in common with this current coronavirus hysteria. But even a child who's, clenching his fists and gnashing his teeth and screaming with a tantrum, who has a single tear roll down his cheek, it's made of water and salt. So in some ways it can be compared to the ocean, I suppose. Wasn't that a cute little rhetorical turn? So yeah, the lesson here is turn to the stories of old. Look at what the stories we've told ourselves, because we not only have ones that divert and enlighten, that have been around for centuries. I still can't emphasize that enough. We have stories that we remember across maybe 2 generations, whereas back in their time, there were stories that everyone knew that were literally, everyone knew them for 10 generations, easily. And not only do we have this huge and rich resource of stories in our past, we have as well the whole framing of them that we see with things like this discussion of the plague years by Boccaccio. And we can see that, faced with circumstances and fears, maybe taking time off from our work, because we can't work, especially if you're in, restaurants or in the bars, you're screwed. And I mean, that's just what we think about automatically. People who are definitely screwed for the time being, but there have to be, 100 times 100 other examples that everyone could share of people who are just fucked right now. And at the same time, hysteria is being whipped up. And so it's worthwhile to sit back and, you need to take some time to bitch, like I do online. If that's your thing, get it out of your system. I certainly do. And there's nothing wrong with a little bit of autism and chasing down the various theories that are, blowing around. Like each one like a grain of sand in a sandstorm. It's like you can't even open your eyes without getting an eye full of conspiracy theories. That has its place too. But maybe we should back up a bit more and do like our peeps did once upon a time, our ancestors, and give some thought to all these stories, how people overcome trial, how they outwit each other, how they mock, how they seek their revenge, how they overcome, how they show their virtue. And perhaps consider that there is an eye watching, and that we can be more than what we are. Give some thought to that lovely Latin motto on Alberti's medal, quid tum? What then? And so, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my opening, highly dramatic little introduction to our discussion. We're 50 minutes in, so I made it last almost an hour. And so now what I would encourage you to do is to throw in questions for me. I think I can follow the live chat here from the entirety of it from my little control window. So I will take a look and see if there are any good questions in there. Hopefully those with moderator wrenches. Oh, good God, there are several in here. I see Zedez. Hello. I see Mr. Ixme. I see John Ski. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate mods being here. So yeah, throw in questions, good questions. However, leave out the ones specifically about the coronavirus. Again, I mean, if they're like leave out the questions about the coronavirus that have to do with, the immediate circumstances, shit today, whatever the latest hysterical belching and burping online is, who's to blame for it, how many cases are here, how it's transmitted. I'm going to be talking to Tim tomorrow, and at that point, I'll roll up my sleeves and get into that mess. For tonight, let's back up as we see in the example of Boccaccio, because after all that business that he described in the city as people were dying and there are thousands of the plague, the 3 men and the 7 women retired to a beautiful estate and played music and told stories to distract each other because there was really nothing else they could do at the time. Let's look to some of our old stories or parallels between then and now that are not bitchy or hysterical. Let's try and dilate the realm of consideration in space and in time to take in things that are more general about the human experience, virtues and vices, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to start from way back, see if there's anything good in there. By the time I get to the current, hopefully there'll be plenty of questions because I've got a little while. I can go at least to, what is it? I've been here about an hour, started at 9:30 to 10:30. I think I can go to 11:30. So, yeah, we should have some time. So, let me see what we have here. Yes, I do have a fan in the background, as Mr. Asme pointed out. There's no way for me to move my computer in relation to my mic at this point. I would have had to set one up, and I didn't have everything together in OBS. We're lucky this started right at all, so my apologies. But hopefully the audio is still there. All right. Kind words from Horatius. I'm just scooting forward here. Let me see who else is in the house. Looks like people got through the lag, and then it's back up. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. We've got people in the chat saying, does anyone want to go on a date? Tire Queen is in the house. Hello. I'm sure she's burning rubber and tracking toilet paper purchases at Costco. All right. There are a lot of people just talking stupid shit in the chat. All right. What else do we have? Any questions? People are talking about dogs. Not seeing many questions. You guys were just patiently waiting. All right, Zed Des was sharing links. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'll get to a question here in just a moment. I just have to scroll through, and this gives you some time to post your own questions. All right, what else do we have? Come now. John Goris, master of Ghost Tank, asks, have you ever seen The Triumph of Death by Bruegel? Bruegel the Elder. Yes, I have seen it, and it is some striking imagery. In its own way, it's even more disturbing than Bosch. All right. Zedes says, Semiagog, would you kindly remind of the title of this reading? It is the first few pages. What I read about the plague in Florence in the middle of the 1300s is the first few pages of Boccaccio's Decameron. All right. $1 trillion bill mentions the great ditches for bodies that are said to be visible from satellite, from space by satellite in Iran that are similar to the mass graves we've heard about in Florence. Again, we'll see. I'm not going to get into my ideas, such as they are, about this whole business with coronavirus. All right, from El Vaquero 555, Semiagog, hey Ali, I got to listen in on a meeting with the top brass at my local fire department. They're bracing for a shit fest. Our hospital system is going to get overwhelmed. Well, perhaps that is possible. Although I did just see on Twitter today that there's a great technique that will allow you to run like 4 ventilators off of a single machine. So I guess there remains the possibility that human innovation will come to our aid. Horatius said, did Oliver ever reveal his IQ has to be in the 150 range? IQ isn't all there is, ladies and gentlemen. And while I've been told my IQ verbally by my mother, based on one test that was given in school and one that was given to me privately by a master's student, I don't have paper for either of them. So what does it matter? Okay. Let us see. More questions. Somebody says Semigog must lead us to battle. The only battle I'll be doing at present is with this beer I have. Prism asks, could it also be that the I is the one saying quid tum? Kind of like Kaiser putting on a gladiatorial contest and presenting a new enemy and asking, so what are you going to do? Certainly it could be. Casey says there are two viruses, COVID and fear. Indeed. What do we have here? Horatius says, did I do well in school? Yeah, up through... In 7th grade, I got in a special program where they gave us the SAT, and I got to go to a special national thing and got an award because I scored in a super high percentile for verbal on the SAT in 7th grade, but my math was kind of like, eh. I had some kind of, I don't know, some kind of issue with mathematics. So, yeah, I did exceedingly well, like crazy over the top well on one side, and on the other, I just did not get traction with maths. All right. From 34534, we have Semigog. Will this virus increase religiosity, and will religions like Mormonism gain from this since they preach prepping for their members and were the first church to cancel services worldwide? I don't know enough about Mormons. And I don't know what kind of success rates they have with their outreach. So I don't even begin to know what kind of luck they have in sharing the good news under normal circumstances to compare to these. So I have no idea. Obviously, when there's stress and uncertainty, what you see is people become more religious or express it or affect it. So I think in a general sense, sure, that'll happen. When it comes to the Mormons in particular, I can only guess that it will probably be most effective in reinforcing the faith of those who are already believers. All right. Big Rock says, Semigog, progressives care so much about Native Americans. Why do they keep inviting people to live on their land? It's a very good question. I don't think they really give a shit about anything. It's all hypocrisy. All right. Alexander Lieb says, Semigog, all this BS would make sense if it is a cover for an incoming asteroid. Israeli News Live said it's an incoming asteroid belt. An incoming belt? Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm buying that. I will say, however, that there is something about this that it just... I don't want to get into this. I want to save it for talking to Tim tomorrow. But it does feel like cover. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Like, it could be explained that this is being used as a social engineering thing to prepare populations for much more serious risks if shit was to break out and people were to use weaponized viral strains and the rest even more seriously. So maybe it's just time that this is the way you beat these practices into a population. But there are a whole lot of other things, and it all just feels really big, as though major movement of pebbles is happening or about to happen on the board. So I'll wait till I talk to Tim tomorrow about that. El Vaquero 555 says, Semigog, the aftermath of the plague ultimately diminished the power of the elites. Do you think there are any parallels to that aspect today? Oh yeah. I mean, I've said it before. Tim has pointed this out, that it's coming for quite some time. I certainly agree with him. There are a whole bunch of people in Brussels who are fit and be out of a job. Yeah, and there is also the possibility that, we'll see tumbrils in the streets. That was something I was hinting at earlier. the one thing is the coronavirus, but if we continue to have stuff going on like in Los Angeles where they let 100 people out of prison to control the virus and the cops aren't being as aggressive going after people, in 2 weeks' time, a week's time, I mean, all kinds of things could happen. And then those trigger other things, and then those trigger other things. So, yeah. Who knows at this point? Am I at the bottom of this now? Are we to the end? Are these all the questions that have been asked? I see it is. Well then, what do we have for questions, ladies and gentlemen? If they do not come rolling in, then what I will do is just wrap this. Oh wait, no, there's a whole bunch it looks like I missed. Wait a minute. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. There's a whole bunch of these that I missed. Good gracious. Where now will I start? Adherent of Lady Columbia has recommended my channel. I do appreciate that. Okay, I think I'm back to where I missed it. So let me see what we have next. John Ski, Semiagog, what was the church's perspective on the Black Plague? Punishment from God, using this as a mode of control? Yeah, Tim would be somebody to talk to about that, because I remember speaking to him at some length many, many years back about the impact it had overall. And as I recall, his impression was he thought that the religious wars, because the Hussites came like 100 years later, and then by 1500 you were well into problems with Erasmus, and then you had the Reformation going, and then it led to the 20 Years' War. I don't know, he seemed to think that a number of assumptions got shattered, and that there were ways in which we continue today to kind of cope with this. The way in which we respond to the specter of plagues and illness was certainly stamped upon our peoples at that time. In terms of the church itself, all I know about it is that there was a big move for rogational processions. So as all these many thousands of people were dying so quickly that no one was even prepared for it, there was a lot of these processions outside the cities that got started in order to beg for forgiveness from God. So you had flagellants, people whipping themselves, and torchlit processions and daytime processions, and singing and groveling in a basement and begging for forgiveness. I tend to think the rogational processions come out of the same response as a stress response for human beings in general, where they migrate. Same kind of thing, instinctive shit, like you get sick and you withdraw to a room away from other people and you just do it naturally. I think getting up and moving is another thing humans naturally do. As far as the church goes, there were doubtless people who sought to portray it as having been judgment. I think, it was just 100-ish years later that Savonarola arose to prominence in Florence. And prior to that time, you look at the writings of Boccaccio, where everybody's banging everybody else's wife and tricking each other and playing games and all the rest, and then you jump to the figure of a Savonarola, who's like a prototypical sort of religious zealot and fundamentalist, if you will, and then that travels forward into the Reformation itself. Yeah, there were all kinds of shocks. There were huge issues with populations and the economy, and just before this happened, you had what they called the Industrial Revolution of the 12th century, or whatever it was, 11th or 12th century, 13th, somewhere in there was a huge, Europe was undergoing huge developments, and it just got knocked back a couple hundred years by this. But sadly, I don't know enough about the church in particular to share much more than that. Semigog, what is your definition of left and right? How do you define yourself on those definitions? At this point, man, I don't even know. I tend to think of left as egalitarian and right as hierarchy. And contrary to a lot of people's expectations, I think that the right still has a bit more claim to individualism. Left going after a kind of atomized, or seeking as an ideal a kind of atomized individual, let's say atomized egotism. And then on the right, there's still an idea of a responsible, reciprocal kind of individuation. But those terms are all over the fucking place. I don't even know what to think of them. Semigog, why in the world do people go buy all the toilet paper? There's got to be some kind of semiotic nugget to gain from that. If there is, I haven't seen it yet. I saw a good meme where they had the people, I think it's from like Outbreak or whatever one of these movies is, where Dustin Hoffman plays a scientist, and it says at the top, he's standing there with another guy, and they're both in their plague suits. And the text of the meme says, "They're all dead." And then at the bottom it says, "Yeah, but they all have really clean asses." I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it's the idea that it's a first world response. It's like they're going to be poopy and they don't want to get poopy on their handsies, so they'll do that thing like, apparently there's a thing with women with using up huge amounts of toilet paper. There's like the tissue boxes and sneezing. It's a kind of like, I don't know, it's like they wrap themselves in it like a kind of gauze. I don't know. I'd have to give that some thought. Other than observing, as everyone else can easily see for themselves, that it's fucking insane. Just nonsense. I mean, last I heard, no one's going to cut off the water, and, God help you, if it comes to that, you can wash your ass. Okay. I mean, provided you have drainage and water. Okay. What is next here? Team Great Britain says, Semiagog, are our leaders incompetent, or are they lying for some benevolent, unseen reason? I don't know. I tend to not want to wade into this at this point because I want to save it for talking to Tim tomorrow. But I will say this. I think that you have an event, that being the pandemic, and I think that that event is, what is it? It's the line from Hamlet about how, nothing is one way or another, but thinking makes it so. It's both a bug and a feature. It's a shield and a sword. I tend to think that there are groups that are weaponizing it in one direction, and there are those who are weaponizing it in the other. So, for example, you see the business of people talking about passing out Yang bucks, or bailing out every single, thing on earth that they can find to pour money into. And that tends to feel more to me like a 9/11, where people come in, no crisis should go to waste. Kind of like Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, I think it is. Contingency planners have been waiting and are going to use this in a specific way, in this case to advance socialism or I don't know. We'll see. So that's definitely one side. And, everybody's, and at the same time, it's being used as a weapon against those who are in power. So Boris is catching all kinds of hell about it. Trump is catching all kinds of hell about it because everybody quite rightly assumes that if you happen to be in office and this comes, then you get to wear it. It doesn't matter how good your thing is. It doesn't matter how good your leadership is. It's generally a negative experience for people. And so since you are in office, it's easy to blame it on you. So, these are two examples I just gave. In one case, promote socialist programs ushered in because it's an emergency, y'all. And coming from another direction, you can say it's weaponized against those who currently have power by those who are currently out of it. In both cases, those seem to be leftist programs. But now what I'd come around to is the possibility that it could be turned in the other direction. Many people have noticed, because it's obvious, this entails closing of borders. And all these people who said, yeah, open borders, well, shit, now we got to close them. And they're put in that uncomfortable position of being forced to acknowledge that there are reasons to close borders. Then you've got the supply chain issues, which could, peel us loose from China. There are the ways in which, Europe is likely to get hurt much more by this than we are. Iran, we don't even know what's going to happen with that. We're going to have to see how this spreads in other locations as well. So there's a whole lot going on. I think the left is definitely trying to weaponize it. To come back to Team Great Britain's question, are our leaders incompetent? Are they lying for a benevolent, unseen reason? I think many of them are incompetent. Some are using it against Trumps and Borises and that kind of thing. Probably others have taken advantage of it the way that people are trying to do with, in Italy and other places where they'll have elections. In some cases, people see that it's to their advantage for elections not to happen until later. In other cases, people figure, no, we have to have it happen now. They're probably coming at it from all these angles. But I tend to think that right now the big question is, it's here, and whether or not it's real, it's perceived as being real. And so, energy is the ability to perform work. What are we going to do with this ball of energy that's just waiting for someone to harness it in precisely the right way? All right. 26 Gunther says, Semiagog, what are your thoughts about our current situation and the road? Oh, I don't think we're out of ammunition. I remember the road opened up where the guy had like 1 or 2 bullets. Everybody's got plenty of ammunition. And as far as I know, outside of Africa, nobody's eating people. So, yeah. I mean, I only saw the movie. I think I read Blood Meridian, but I haven't read any other Cormac McCarthy. Jesus says, Semigod, please link up with Marty Leeds, please. You would have an amazing conversation. I don't know who he is, but I'll take a look. Anonymous user, Semigods, where do you think the markets will be at November 1st? I think they will have recovered greatly. I mean, first off, I'm the last person to ask. Go ask Academic Agent or something. I know fuck all about economics, but if you just want the opinion of someone who is qualified to do little more than bitch, I would say that they will have greatly recovered from crashes that we haven't seen the bottom of yet, but that it's not going to upset people as much as everyone might imagine, because there will be vistas that have opened up of new ways to make money that will mobilize, that will get people who are fence sitting among the current elites to come over because of the big opportunities, and it's going to co-opt a whole shitload of people who might otherwise have gone the traditional elite path, but they're going to move over because they see that the momentum and the energy and the new money to be made will be over on this other side. And that's where we have to see what happens with supply chain changes, and in particular the medical industry and the pharmaceutical market, manufacturing. We'll see. It's going to be pretty interesting, I think. All right, I'm scrolling down, and I'm looking for questions. And are there any here? Am I on live chat, top chat? Just hit to the bottom. Prism says, Semigog, what's the funniest name for the virus you've heard? Mine is beer AIDS. I don't know, all I heard was Kung Flu. That's it. Maybe I'm missing. Let me go over here, peoples. This chat is not operating like it normally does. Let me just go over and just look at the normal channel. Bear with me just one moment. I want to make sure I'm not missing people's questions. If we get a burst of them, then I will stay until 11:30. If not, I will wrap at 11. All right, let's go over to Plague Reflections. And what do we have here? Are we going to see a chat that is showing anything more? People are asking about relationships between coronavirus and comets. I'm just not there with you yet, peoples. All right, let me put this on live chat and see if I'm seeing more over here. Remember, if you want me to see the questions, you have to put the @Semiagog on it. Otherwise, somebody said 9/11 inside job, your view. Well, I can tell you this, whatever 9/11 is, it certainly isn't what we've been told it is. There's a whole lot more going on with that. That's about as far as I'd like to get into it. Okay, in live chat, it looks like 99 Iron Duke asked 2. Let me see if I can get back here, since it appears I've missed them. Remember, though, that you need to put the @Semiagog in it, or I'm likely to miss the question. But Iron Duke, I am trying. There we go. Semiagog, if this pandemic is real, and I'm inclined to think it largely is, do you agree that it's the biggest thing to hit the world since World War II? No, as best I can tell, if we believe all the figures that are being shared with us, at this point, it has more in common with a flu pandemic from 1957, an avian flu pandemic from 1957 that also started in China and caused big problems in the U.S. I mean, I haven't looked at the Johns Hopkins figures lately, but we're still under. Well, here, let me pull it up. And here I was saying I wasn't going to get in. I'm going to just do this briefly because I would prefer to talk about things that are a little deeper than just the immediate circumstances of the illness, as I will likely be talking about this at length tomorrow with Tim. But let me see here. Why is this not coming up? Coronavirus map. Is this it? Yes, hopefully. We'll see in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. And what do we have here? Total number. Come now, this is slow. Maybe I should have put this on low latency. Alright, we'll wait while that's coming up. Let's see if there's another question. I'm coming back to you, Iron Duke. Inheritant of Lady Columbia says, Semiagog, I was wondering if you and Tim could talk about old versus new Americans, sort of difference of Americans via the individual ways of immigration, ultimately asking what is an American. I'll ask him, but there are a few things in there. There's the Francis Trollope book about America, and you can find it, where we talked about that. There's one called Ornery Americans. I'm thinking you saw these things, but they're pretty much along the lines of what you're asking for. Okay, why will this COVID map not come up? Dirtbag. I think I've just screwed my bandwidth. I'm trying again. So much for having fiber optic. Okay, it's not coming up, so I'll just answer as best I can from what I remember. We're under 200,000 cases globally of people being, logged in as actually having the virus. The number of deaths is still really low, even including Italy. Europe is beginning to look worse, but I guess it's China, then Italy, then Iran. Last I looked, it's definitely going to get worse before it gets better. But take a look at the H1N1 avian influenza or whatever that came to the United States during Obama's deal, and you had, what was it? I'll get these numbers wrong, but it was in the millions of people who were infected with it, and then more than 10,000 died, I'm sure. And that's just in the U.S. So some aspect of it is definitely due to hysteria, and I don't think that this is the biggest thing to hit the world since World War II. We'll see. I'm not buying it. So the question is really the thing that we touched on earlier, which is, that different groups are trying to use this for their own purposes. I think the Chinese are part of this story beyond just being a point of origin, China being a point of origin. I think they're also an active group attempting to use this as a pivot point or leverage, fulcrum, whatever. I think the leftist forces of progress are doing that as well. And then I think the right sees opportunities in it, or at least they see that if they pretend it's not happening, they'll just go under, which means they have to out hysteria, the hysterics, and go, okay, we'll go the next step. So I don't know where it's headed yet. I'm a little concerned about it because it seems to be a big bunch of shit is going on. So there is one of Iron Duke's questions. Apologies for keeping you waiting on that. I will look for further questions here. Ladies and gentlemen, I keep seeing stuff about comets and coronavirus. I'm not buying that, ladies and gentlemen. Row at the bottom. We've got a whole slew of them. A day asks, Semiagog, will you take a vaccine if made available? I withhold the right to refuse any vaccine. I'm not somebody who thinks that all vaccines are fake, and I understand that risks come with vaccines, but I would look at who created the vaccine and what the data on it is, and then I'd make up my mind there. At this point, I'm not really, I don't know if I'm buying it all. This business about the virus affecting the testicles, I'm still not buying that either. I don't even, yeah. Julie Cole says, Semigog, do you know what happened to Michael Black, Scottish guy? I used to be subscribed. Yeah, a lot of people have come through and asked me, and I have no idea. I wish I knew. A lot of people have asked, and I even handed out the email address I think I used to have for him. Back then, you could connect directly better with messages in YouTube, but no one has since seen him. Okay, this JASJHSLK has repeatedly said, want to tickle my goatee while I feed you a carrot. Yeah, you can fuck off. Okay. What else do we have here? Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, just trying to catch up here with that asshole. Sorry. I'm terrible with text, so I don't even know how to block people. Generally, I don't like to do it and won't, but just don't be stupid. Iron Duke says, Semigog, my other question to make it easier to find was out of Canada, USA, and UK, who has the best and worst chance of stopping mass third world immigration? I think all of them have an excellent chance, and that they're going to react in similar ways within roughly the same window of time. So, yeah, just wait. This is something's going on, and I think, the things have begun to move. The question is, how and in what direction. And I'm still trying to figure that out. I look forward to discussing it with Tim tomorrow. But I bring all that up because this is just the first of the unforeseen events. I think we're going to have other unforeseen events, and everyone's going to be talking words like new normal, or, yesterday I would have never imagined this. So everybody who's had their prognostications is probably going to get, moved over a couple lanes by shifts that are going to happen out there that in some respects will be unexpected. Boomer21, hello sir, says, Semigog, it just so happens that countries next to China, like North Korea, Vietnam, Russia, are doing fine, except the G7. Bioweapon? I don't know. South Korea is having problems. I will tell you this, and I think Vietnam probably will, because, last I heard, coronavirus was already spreading in Thailand while it was just getting started in China. So we'll have to see. I have noticed that it's all over the Northern Hemisphere and mainly in Europe and the United States, in North America. We'll have to see. Maybe that has to do with the difference in temperature with the Southern Hemisphere and the shift of the seasons. We'll be finding that out over coming weeks. I'll say it certainly could be a bioweapon, but that is just speculation. And as always, I suggest all of you follow the recommendations provided by the authorities as to how you should be behaving. 34534 says, Semigog, will the virus reawake the purity, sanctity, and loyalty value traits in normies that characterize right-wing value systems? Meh. Some of them. But the majority of people are going to behave like them, as they always do. Perhaps it will improve things. We'll see. Anything's possible. It depends on how much worse it gets before it gets better. Louis the 17th says, Semigog, no one knows about the several outbreaks of bubonic plague across the Ottoman Empire during the 19th century. Yeah, I certainly don't know about it. I have, with some interest, looked to see figures for Turkey, which you would expect to see swarming with this, and they show very little. So I don't know what's going on with all of that. And now this thing just refreshed and screwed up where I was in the question list. Apologies. Oh, there we are. Mr. Ixme says, Semigog, look at the deaths to recovered rates in Italy roughly 44%. That's intense. Yeah, but again, we don't have a numerator. I'm sorry, we don't have a denominator, and we just don't know what's. I mean, we don't even know that. I'd like to know something more about the ethnicity of the people who caught it in Italy, given what I've heard about the huge populations of sort of under the table textile industry Chinese workers and things. It looks bad in Italy, certainly, but I can't quite tell what's happening there. Certainly, Italy is the worst place outside of China, and currently the one that has the most dire prospects at present. There's just a bunch of weirdness about things there. Like they put people on ventilators and it doesn't work. I think one of the things that we may be dealing with is that this didn't start when everyone's pretending it started, that maybe it started earlier. Again, just speculation. Do your own research. Don't trust me. But it's just, shit's fucking weird. And I have yet to kind of put the pieces together in any way that properly makes sense to me. Other than that, I tend to agree with Tim in terms of thinking that this is not an accident. Dave Hughes Farm says, Semiagog, and hello, sir. Semiagog, I've been watching for a while. I know, sir. I know. We talked a few times about farming. Always interested in how you and Tim first crossed paths. I placed a brochure in an occult bookstore. I was 19 years old, and I made up these pretty desktop publishing, which is what they called it at the time, brochures where I was trying to meet other people who knew esoteric things, and I inserted it into books by authors that I thought were interesting at the bookstore. And he was helping a guy out who owned that bookstore. That's when you had specialty bookstores. And he came across the little brochure, got in touch, and I met him then. I was 19. Okay. Alexander Lieb says, Israeli News Live also said the third temple is already built underground. Is this possible in your opinion? Sure, man, anything's possible, but I mean, what's going on here? We're going from how there's a belt of asteroids coming towards the Earth, and now the third temple is already built underground in Israel. I mean, next is going to be like troglodytes and flat Earth and hollow Earth and yeah. Yes, it's possible. Okay, Semigogs, this is from Mr. Xme. CFR for closed cases is 9%. That's massive. Yeah, it sure looks that way. It's odd that we don't really see that anywhere else, so, or not that I'm aware of, so, yeah. And I understand that, like, the problems in Washington State, if I heard correctly, had to do with a particular outbreak in a nursing home. So if you had that kind of transmission through whatever vectors, a caregiver or whatever, into a few nursing homes, that all by itself could account for much of what's going on in Italy. Though I tend to think it probably won't, because, you're hearing about cases of young people and other weirdness. I don't know. Semigog is from Adherent of Lady Columbia. Semigog, are you and Tim ever going to do that video on wife hunting? Make it like a reality TV show. You guys can watch as I walk up and approach ladies in a bar or something. I don't know. We have one. By the way, that won't happen. We have one that's called like Right Wing Women or Women on the Right. I remember it's got a picture that I pixelated on the edges of a woman with like an apron and like a late 1800s style outfit. So there's at least one clip up there like it. But then again, since you've been following the channel for a while, I imagine you've probably already seen it. All right, next question. Horse Mumbler, hello. Says, Semiagog, what are your thoughts on the relative advantages of founding new centers of culture and community and colonizing and or converting the culture of already existing areas in architecture? Well, it just means make the world like you want it around you. And there's the idea of doing it right where you are and going other places and doing it. And I'm all for that, provided it can be done, with a minimum of fuss. The issue is founding new centers of culture and community. That's much easier said than done. Either you have tons of money and you have good organizers who get lucky and like establish something that stays, or you waste a little less money and a lot of time and nothing happens. I mean, basically you have to look at all these things of like grand cultural projects for recreation of the reestablishing the true Western traditions on the foundation of all our history. You confront the kind of problems you do when you're trying to save a dying language. You know, thousands of languages every year die because there are no more speakers. You know, look at what happens when you try to reintroduce them. How much luck are they having with teaching, you know, the old languages in Ireland? I think they're having some success in Wales. Um, Celtic languages have disappeared all over the joint, like from the coast of Atlantic France and Spain. Um, it's a difficult thing to attempt to recreate yourself from nothing. Look at the Circassians in diaspora trying to recreate their culture and how difficult it is for them. So whenever someone talks about, as I said, doing something to recreate or revivify Western culture, I look at the business of trying to reintroduce languages, and that shit is hard. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's not easy. Same goes for like changing an area around you. You have to have a group of people who agree on the culture and the norms and the forms, and that is so hard to find these days in areas where diversity has been enforced as our strength. 34534 says, Semigog, what is your opinion on sports ball? And could the mass panic be due to the cancellation of the normies' bread and circuses causing them to become panicked apes? We're not really there yet. I do look forward to seeing how it goes with closing of pubs and bars in places like Ireland or in the UK. Yeah, we'll see what could possibly go wrong. I think it goes together lovely in a lovely way with people being out of work, desperate for money, having a lot of extra time on their hands, warmer weather coming, so people will be outside showing their asses. Jails being emptied because we can't have that, and yeah, it could get exciting rather quickly. And you know, not being able to go to football games is just the beginning. $1 Trillion Bill says, Semigog, does the reemergence of older forms of the human experience, for example, mortality, community fear, extraordinary horror, etc., bode well for a spiritual and intellectual revival of the West? Well, it certainly fits those little graphics we see where we talk about how weak men create bad times, and bad times require strong men, and strong men require good times, and good times create weak men. So, yeah, I mean, it can't be any worse than what we've been dealing with, where we're just, you know, we're rotting away into nothing from a kind of luxuria, a poisonous, vicious luxuria. All right. Day, Semigog, suppose they'll put virus forecasts on the news like weather forecasts? I suppose. There's no weather forecast left. All the news is virus forecasts all day, all the time, on every channel and every program everywhere. So it's rather beside the point. Zedez asks about the guy who's talking shit. If he comes back and talks shit, then yeah, ban him. And if he doesn't, then let him stay. Unless he becomes obnoxious to you, in which case, yeah, boot him. Drunken Mongoose says, Semigog, how perilous is this virus for the refugees congregating in Turkey? Are they isolated in one place or scattered about? Are they in metropolitan or rural areas? Now, as best I know, they're fucking everywhere. They're in big cities and smaller towns. I heard from Turkish friends who visited that they come out on the street and do the whole thing of trying to wash your windshields for you when you stop at a red light. They have panhandling everywhere. They've been put into housing. And those are people who live in Istanbul or Ankara, those kind of places. But, you know, I heard that story about a relatively small town or small city, probably large town, called Maraş, where the locals came and drove them out, drove them north. Certainly the whole area of European Turkey, right next door to Thrace, you know, by Edirne and the Greek and Bulgarian border, that's got lots of small towns and villages, and I'm sure they're not enjoying the fact that these folks are running everywhere. That could really blow up in Erdogan's face. And yeah, virus could appear anywhere. Remember, we figured out what the virus is, so what is to stop multiple countries from flying to multiple other countries and just sort of spreading the virus around to have hotspots start? I'm not saying people are doing that, but I don't see how it'd be difficult if somebody's intelligence service wanted to do it. So every kind of mess could start. Prism says Semigog Africa has been oddly quiet during all of this. Yeah, except it looks like South Africa, maybe somebody who's in the chat can jump in, but I think in South Africa they're beginning to take real steps in showing some concern. For my part, I'm just waiting to see if that's really because of the weather. Anon Leibowitz says, are you a prepper semi-agog? No, I mean, I have 3 or 4 containers of 5 gallon each of water, and then water squirreled in other places. I've got canned food and tinned food and, stuff where if I had to, I could last about a month, provided that I still had running water and gas for cooking. If that went out, I've got probably a week's worth of fuel. I could cut wood in the backyard. I've got water filtration stuff for this horrible creek nearby. I could, filter and boil and filter it again. So yeah, I'm not really a prepper, but I'm not like sitting here flat-footed. I have some options. I don't just have maps on my phone. I bought highly detailed maps of the city and highly detailed paper maps so that if I had to, I can get out of here, even if cell phones are off, which is what far, far more than what most people can say. All right. Und what is next here? Do we have any further questions? Ladies and gentlemen, are there further questions for me? Prism says, Semigog, sweet, bitter, or sour alcoholic drinks. Well, this is a Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. So I like sweet and bitter. Sour only in the summer, like a Weiss beer or something. Generally, I smoke, so I need heavier flavors. I'm not going to be like chasing the faint, exciting, overtones detectable in the flavor of lettuce leaf. So I tend to like heavier sauces and flavors and darker beers and that kind of thing. But I can do sweet and bitter. All right. Further questions? We have 23 minutes left. $1 trillion bill. Semigog, have you heard that you can get samples of the virus on the dark web? No, I hadn't. Jasich says, Semigog, how will the Israel-Iran proxy war end? How will it look 10 to 30 years from now? I don't know, but I don't think we're going to have to wait 10 years for whatever is in store for Iran to happen. I think it's going to happen much more quickly, but I don't know what it'll be. I believe that the current regime will probably be out. But God knows. Prism says, wish I had a cellar to store the old Mormon year's worth of supplies. If you're going to be crazy, might as well be the prepared kind of crazy. Yes. I'm not quite there. Although I have probably more options than most people. Signum Crucis says, Semigog, do you think we are subject to historical cycles and can never break free of them? I mean, I'm not sure. Are we going in a Nietzschean myth of the eternal return, or are we talking about like some Spenglerian set of cycles, or are we looking at like the Kali Yuga and the rest? All I'll say is that less than a cycle, I see it being more like a spiral. So certain themes are repeated because it does circle around and around, but because it's a spiral, it changes the planes upon which it operates. So you can see themes and things, but it continues to move forward. So there's never that sense of complete repetition. That's all I can say to that. Anonymous user says, Semigog, thoughts on reports that the virus persists on surfaces for days. Seems someone spreading intentionally, but we can't admit that, so we pretend suddenly viruses survive on sterile surfaces. I mean, viruses can survive on things. If they're a sterile surface, I mean, as soon as they're finished being sterilized, they can, depending on what kind of metal you're dealing with, or if there's some special coating, I suppose you could make it where anything that landed on it died, or most things that landed on it died. But what's sterile anywhere? I mean, and even if it is sterilized, it just stays that way for a short time. All right. $1 trillion bill, Semigog on South Africa, very high rates of HIV, TB, diabetes, obesity, etc. Lots of guns too. They absolutely have to stop the spread, otherwise it'll get ugly. Yep. Philosophicat says, Semigog, You believe in Mercury retrograde now. Well, it certainly screwed up our attempt to have an interview. Hopefully we will be able to circle back around, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be talking with Philosophicat before too long about some terms bandied about and commonly used on the dissident right. And yeah, I made fun of Mercury in retrograde. And we tried to communicate, and it was just a shit show. So, all right. 99 Iron Duke says, Semiagog, the number of known cases is all about how much testing is being or not being done. UK experts, where they're not testing, are saying up to 50,000 are already infected. Africa, God knows. Yeah. And basically, guys, we're talking about a flu/cold. I mean, it's new, but it's a flu/cold. It's going to be everywhere on everybody. And it very likely is already everywhere on everybody. Which is just, it makes me wonder what the hell is going on here. There are just a number of ways in which, 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4. It's crazy, 2 and 2 equals 19. It just, eh. But yeah, testing is what everybody wants to crow about. But at this point, it just seems like way, way down the list, as I've been foaming at the mouth about on Twitter recently. All here is testing, 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 testing. It's like the thing. We're not getting tested, and so that's a failure. And I'm just like, at this point, I mean, and even some time back, in what fucking way does testing matter? And insofar as it does matter, it's very, very far down the list. I realize, of course, Iron Duke, 99 Iron Duke, that's not precisely what you're talking about. But I just had to go off on my own little rant there. And yes, we don't know how many people are infected. I think the denominator is huge. 34534 says, Semiagog, do you think your unique name has shaped your identity personality, considering your first and last name is rare, unique, and sounds waspish? Well, my last name is Perrin, and that's French, and it's like as common, it's not quite as common as Smith, but it's super common. Perrin. There's nothing rare or really unique around it, and it doesn't sound waspish. I mean, the Perrin side of the family was French Catholic. Oliver, on the other hand, I'll grant you, for all that I now meet, hordes of women who have little lapdogs they named Oliver, which is kind of horrifying. I guess it's better than Braxton and Caitlin and all these other fucking names that are in fashion now. The only way it changed me was that I identified with the character Oliver in the Song of Roland at a young age, and I was forced to listen to, is it Gilbert and Sullivan? Some of that, all the consider yourself at home, all that shit I had to grow up listening to. Yeah, Zed Des says if you haven't thought of it, consider going and subscribing to Philosophicat's channel. Maybe we'll get Philosophicat to tell people to come subscribe to mine, since her channel's bigger than mine. Elvicaro 555 Semiagog, if we have to shut down normal life until July or August, what are you going to do to deal with the boredom? Exactly what I've been doing. I mean, I'm going to have to find a way to stretch things without any income. I started working out again. I was off that for 2 months, dealing with a fucked up tooth. I had a dentist who just, it's like, you need a filling. And instead of a filling, he gave me the need for a root canal. I really appreciate that from him. $3,000, $3,500 later. Piece of shit. I fucking hate dentists. I mean, bad dentists. Good dentists, they're important for civilization. Bad dentists. Anyway, yeah, and I'll dance. I got my flamenco shoes in, so I'm working on rhythmic stuff. I got a bunch of tree limbs to cut. I got tons of shit I can do. And I'm hopefully going to be spending some time in the woods. Alright, we have 16 minutes left. What is next? Jazz says, Semiagog, is China going to become the superpower and pass the USA? I know it wants to, and perhaps one day, but I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as they think. I think they've got some more excitement coming their way. Prism, Semiagog, this is random, but I discovered a tasty way to get vitamin C from Reading about France in the 19th century. Fizzy lemonade. Sounds like SodaStream. Shit. Yep. I might have myself a look. 99 Iron Duke. Semigok Dave the Distributist is streaming tomorrow. Do you like his channel? I do. He's one of the most original on the Dissonant Right. Does his channel just go under the name The Distributist? If that's the same guy, I saw his thing where he was looking about for unifying themes on the right, and I enjoyed that. But that's all of his content that I've seen. $1 Trillion Bill says, Semigog leaked UK documents note pandemic could extend into spring 2021. Can we quarantine this long without major repercussions? Not without major economic ones. And so that is the big question, is how will all this business play out economically? And I just get the sense now that everyone is embracing actions that will cause more or less serious economic collapse for a time. And so it's that whole business of one's pushing one way, it's a shield for one group, it's a weapon for another. It depends on how they use it, but they're both, the blind man and the elephant. One of them says it's columns, the other one's holding its legs, the other one pulls its tail, says it's a rope, another one grabs a ear and says it's canvas like a tail, so it depends on how you look at it. It seems to me that there are a bunch of people saying, don't throw me in that briar patch. Like, that's the vibe I get off of Trump, is he's saying, oh, don't throw me into that briar patch. This excuse to do an $80 billion intervention or whatever it is that's under discussion in the legislature. Like, I don't know where it's going yet. Don't know. But the economic aspect makes me think that it might be something like 9/11, where the events were used as a pretext to make all sorts of changes. The question is whether or not this was, who planned this, whether both sides planned it, whether there aren't two sides and there's only one and we're foolishly thinking they are, all kinds of crap that I have not yet sorted out. So what is next? El Vaquero says, Semigog China lied about Corona Chain, is blaming the U.S. for it and threatened to cut off our pharmaceuticals. Do you think they've ejected supply chains from their borders? No. They're going to make as much money as they can for as long as they can. In that respect, this is another thing I want to talk to Tim about, but I tend to think China has pushed this to basically, it's a premature detonation. You know how, like, when there's a bomb and you're afraid it might go off, you send something up to set it off anyway. And in doing so, you make it, like, maybe hurt the other party more. Premature detonation. China has been looking down both barrels of supply chain decoupling, and I tend to think that they maybe did this to force it early and to leave everybody reeling and in a weak position. I don't know. We'll see. There's more going on. But yeah, certainly with the pharmaceuticals, specifically and more generally with supply chain, I just don't see how they're not going to be major ways that we will disentangle now that otherwise would have taken much longer or may not have happened at all. Mr. Siegfried says, Semigog, what are your thoughts about MGTOW? It's just a dead end. I get the idea that, what did Tim used to say his wife said about him? When people asked Tim's wife about him, she would say, yeah, I know, but he's the best of a bad lot. Like, I get that there are a lot of crappy people out there, but men and women are supposed to live together and reinforce and support each other. Now, these days, sadly, it seems that's more the exception than the rule, but culturally, what is there for us if we don't continue to pursue trying to do just that, to bring our men and women together, to create future generations, proper relationships, make each other stronger, benefit from each other's respective strengths, etc. Oh, and now shit just jumped around on me. 11 minutes left. 34534 says, Semigod, have you read the Quran, the Vedas, etc.? What's your favorite religious book that you took value out of? I've read much of the Quran, not all of it. The Vedas I have not read yet, but I did buy it, and it's sitting down there on another shelf waiting to get read. I'm at this point, I might have to have a moratorium on buying books, but then I get all these recommendations and I'm like, yeah. And I'm not reading fast enough, because in large part because I'm spending so much time online. However, I am reading still quite a bit, just not fast enough to keep up with the rate at which the books come in. So, yeah, the Tao, translated by Macintosh, is the religious book that I read that I took the most value out of. The Tao Te Ching, translated by Charles Macintosh, Theosophical Publishing Company or whatever, 1920s. Best translation, 244 verses. All right. Semiagog, have you studied the 16 archetypal personalities as such, and or the taxonomies and patterns of Jungian cognitive function that underlie and explain each? Might make for some good clips. No, I have not, but you know who has is a guy who's been on my channel. He's a nice guy. Haven't talked to him in a while. Hope to be able to speak to him again soon. He goes under the name Right Ruminations, and that's the old, INFJ type shit, right? The 16 archetypal personalities. I think they're the same things, Myers-Briggs or whatever. Based on Jungian stuff ultimately. Right Ruminations is just crazy about that shit. And if I'm thinking about the right thing, so I would check out his channel. Again, Right Ruminations. He's got lots of talk about it, lots of thoughts about it. He seems kind of a mentat that way. His lips are stained with spice. All right. 99 R. Duke says Semigog USA and UK are spending money like water, and Australia is moving that way. Yes, indeed. That's one of my concerns. Yeah, 99 Iron Duke is talking about biolabs in Wuhan. Yeah, as if. $1 trillion bill. Semigog, which countries could we expect to see collapse as the virus establishes itself there? Venezuela, Iran, South Africa, Syria, North Korea, etc. Could we expect more refugees, regional conflicts after? Yeah, maybe, but I think people are just not going to be in the mood for them, especially if our population is just getting over whatever some peak is, and then refugees show up and you get a few headlines about how they're testing positive, and they're going to be like, well, do you want this slightly mutated strain from South Africa, which is coming by way of Brazil and then Latin America up through to the Texas border now that we've just gotten over the peak? Does it now sound like a good time to reintroduce it? I think you're going to find people are not interested. I think Venezuela is screwed. Iran is screwed. South Africa, I mean, it's already screwed. Syria, we'll see. It's probably going to suck in Italy, I'll tell you that. North Korea, I expect they're going to be able to take all kinds of strange draconian measures that are going to render it less of an issue for them, but I am not sure. All right, Zed Des kindly provided a link for Right Ruminations. Thank you very much, Zed. Maybe you want to know saying America is screwed. I don't know yet. I don't know about that. We'll see. All right. Well, now we are 7 minutes out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is about the last shot for you to be able to get a question in. We have about 5 minutes left. I tend to agree that the West is ultimately going to be fine. Just looks at Semigog is USA really leading the Middle East. Compared to our presence there in the past, yes, but completely no. That's my view. 99 Iron Duke observes Semigog, if coronavirus turns out to be bad, it might, hopefully, turn a lot of people against open borders and mass immigration and even globalism. We can hope. Yes, indeed, sir. We can hope. But I think there's going to be a few more twists and turns with all of this before we really get through with it. And remember, there's the business of virus. Combine that with crime, with terrorist attacks. Think about what could happen if, for example, the United States just came out and bluntly said and provided some kind of evidence for the idea that the spread of the Chinese coronavirus was actually an attack of some kind that ended up spreading and hitting the U.S. as well. What if they came up with just really pumping and pushing a Jingo narrative about how it came out of China. I mean, because it appears it did. So in addition to the virus, the possibility of terrorism, political collapses, economic collapses, I mean, there's plenty here that people can kind of stir together. Bubble, toil and trouble, to make everything that we think is pretty bad get quite a bit worse still. However, for the majority of people, I think this is more going to be an economic hit and media insanity. Marc-Andre Otis says, Semigod, we love your work. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do indeed. Elvacaro observes, Semigod, we're not leaving the Middle East until either we're forced out or the US dollar collapses. Well, we'll see. Yes, I don't see it happening anytime soon. Baby Wino Boy says, Semigod, are you prepping? It's past the point of prepping. I've got my stuff socked away in case, something bad happens. Really, all I'm missing is a good large gas jug or two to keep a little more than a tank can hold in my car. And then the main thing is just to never go below half tank, just fill it up all the time. But yes, everything else I've got as taken care of as I can. All right, 4 minutes left. Peoples, hopefully you're not stuck in big cities. I'm in a fairly big city, and man, I can't wait to get out. I'm going to go live in the forest. Oh, I'm going to go live in the forest, and it's going to be lovely. I'll go outside on my porch, and I'll hear the wind blowing through the trees, and I'll think to myself, that sounds vaguely like the highway, but it isn't. Like maybe hear a truck in the distance. See nothing but trees around on all sides. Yes, that would be nice. Elvacaro 555 says, I even have antibiotics. I believe it. Hopefully it's better than just having a crate of like fish antibiotics or whatever it is. Yeah. I expect Vaquero has himself set up. He seems to have the proper profile. Okay. Well, people, we are 3 minutes out. So this is our last. Okay, we have one again from Justice saying, Semigod, will we see a revolution in Saudi Arabia like Gaddafi did in Libya and kicked out the USA? I have no idea what's going on with Saudi Arabia. The biggest issue they're facing is the fact that all that Eastern Mediterranean natural gas is going to come online, which is going to kind of screw them. And Russia can always ramp up as well. So Saudi Arabia is currently walking a knife edge. I think in the future they're going to have to hump the leg of China rather than the West if things get divided out, as I think may happen. Horsemonger says, Semigod, do you have a big, large dog yet? A sighthound, perhaps? No, I just didn't get raised with dogs right. I can get around to knowing them and being with them and handling them properly, but I'm just, when I was a kid, my father had a German Shepherd, and he just kept it in the basement half the time, and it was miserable. I'm not going to have an indoor dog at this point. So once I get out into the woods, yeah, I'll probably have a couple of them. But not yet. Alright. Prism says, good. Almost time for my midnight snack of fried toilet paper. Alright. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end. So I am just going to come back around and recap what we talked about. We have this whole story from Boccaccio of the plague years in Florence and all the shit that went down and all the horrors and how we can think about that and compare it to our present circumstances, though our present circumstances are so much less dire, so much more superficial. They're our current version of first world problems. But we have these stories. We have stories like the Alexander Romance. We have stories like the Gesta Romanorum, stories that we told to each other amongst ourselves for centuries. And we have Boccaccio's Decameron, 10 stories each for 10 days that they told to distract and divert themselves there in the countryside surrounding Florence as they got out of the city, 3 men and 7 women. And we've seen how these stories, some of them, they have their superficial aspects to keep them entertaining, to keep the groundlings interested. But some of them actually have some nuggets that can be chewed on for quite some time that might, for those who meditate upon them, might yield some semblance of an increase in prudence. And that's worth some thinking about. We too should retire from events because we really don't have much choice at this point. We can't work. People are crazy out there. We're forced into our homes. Perhaps we should spend some time thinking about who we are and what we are and where we are, and take a look at this idea of an eye that watches us, that judges us. Again, if you're a rationalist and into reason, it can be a subjective experience of evaluating yourself. If you're a neo-pagan, then it could be, any number of great sky gods. Christian of whatever description. Obviously, there's a long tradition of the all-seeing eye of God. Perhaps we should consider why it is we're here and what we're doing, what things we can improve about ourselves, how we can increase our knowledge, how we can wring more out of the experience of being here, and perhaps do our part for those around us who are less fortunate. All of these aspects bear consideration, and so they bring us around to what I promised to discuss in this. And so I want to tap it again now that the AMA is finished, and that is this idea of quid tum. When presented with this idea of the all-seeing eye, will we think to ourselves merely, so what? Or will we recognize that we are being judged, certainly in some fashion, or likely in some fashion, if at a minimum, by ourselves, and consider quid tum as a reminder of what then, as it is impressed there on Alberti's medallion beneath the winged eye, with the thunderbolts and lightning bolts issuing forth from it. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my consideration for this evening. It seems all of us are going to have quite a bit more time on our hands, and that means that there will likely be more of these streams. Again, I'll be talking to Mr. Tim tomorrow, and we will hopefully be talking about the virus, unless he's just bored as hell and sick of it, which I would understand. And I should have that up within about 12 to 24 hours from when I record it, and that'll be tomorrow. So in a day and a half to 2 days from now, you'll see that material, and I will be doing more of these discussions. I've got one coming up with Philosophicat in short order. I think I'll probably be speaking to Cassius, whose channel that you should check out. He does all kinds of translations of public announcements and speeches in Europe. He kindly provides translations from the Spanish or the Italian or the German and the rest. He's based in Ireland. I expect I'll probably speak to him within the next few days. So yeah, there is more to come. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Thank you very much to everyone I might have missed in the chat. I appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts. Thanks very much to the mods. And yeah, until next time, that is all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Semiagog, and I am